right, everyone. My name is Alysse Bryson, and I am filling in for Heather today. Welcome to King County Recovery Conversations, and I am here with my new friend, Carolyn Presnell, and we are so excited to hear. I'm excited to hear a lot from you today. I want to hear a little bit about your story, but I really want to hear about what you're up to now and what's going on over at Weld Seattle. So, where should we get started?
Thanks for the introduction. I think we'll start at the beginning.
Start at the very beginning.
We'll start at the beginning. I think, we'll start at the beginning of the end.
Okay. I like the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end. I come by, drug and alcohol use pretty naturally. A rite of passage in my household, family disease for sure. Mm-hmm. And all of its attendant sufferings were really, the things that I used to reason why it was acceptable for me to be loaded the way I was loaded. And it took me, I started getting locked up when I was 13, and I walked into the penitentiary the last time at 45. And I had wanted to be sober for a long time. I had actually been sober. In my 20s, I'd gotten sober, and I didn't know that I did it because I had some kids that were in state care. And I wanted to kiss my kids. Yeah. And so I didn't travel the road of sobriety because I had this deep interest in being sober. I didn't even understand what it meant to be sober. I didn't know what it felt like. It wasn't a part of my life experience. My grandmother was probably the only person that was sober in my life. Mm-hmm. And but I had this deep grief about the life that my kids were experiencing as a result of my addiction. Mm-hmm. And so I got sober when I was 25, and I didn't understand any of the stuff. I ended up being a 12-step gal. I think one of the first times that I ever got called on in a meeting, I said, "Hi, my name is Carolyn, and I'm an addict. None of you appear to have an original thought. Thanks for letting me share."
Oh, yeah. And shut them down.
And I wasn't trying to be, cruel or snarky. I really didn't understand what I was doing there. And if I had known that 12-step rooms weren't connected to the cops, I probably would have forged a slip. I didn't know any of that stuff with it. I thought it was all connected.
And isn't that how funny how people don't realize you can just forge your own slip?
You can just forge your own slip.
You just different handwritings. It's not that hard.
All the things.
Yeah.
And I had no relationship with any of it. It was my first exposure to actual sobriety. Mm-hmm. When I had first made the decision, there were a series of things that had gone down. I had said a prayer into the universe. It was I know that it has to be different. I have to go get these kids. I didn't realize that I didn't have a choice about using. I thought I had always been choosing it until it came time to stop, and then I couldn't. And I had a series of just really deep calamities happen after that prayer. Violence against my person, hit by a car in accident, hit by a car on purpose, a series of things. And I was like, what's going on, man?
That's a lot.
And I had this little window of time. And the deal was that I had to call every day between 9 and 11, to get a.m. to get a bed and treatment. And I'm a girl that can't go to the store to buy a pack of cigarettes and be trusted to get home. And so I have no idea how I'm going to pull this off. And it was 30 days of every day. And I would fall asleep, and I'd wake up and I'd have 10 minutes, and I'd run to a payphone, and I'd have no money, and I'd reach in the coin slot and there'd be a coin. It was those kind of divine little miracles. And I was able to do it. And anyways, I went to treatment the first time in, October 2nd of 1995, actually. It was the day of the verdict of the OJ trials. And
that's a memorable day.
It was a memorable day. And I had been involved in drugs and the lifestyle stuff that goes with it, and violence and all of those things. But those had become really a natural part of my existence.
So they seemed normal. Right?
They were normal. They were safety hazards that went with the territory.
Sure.
And but I had never been so terrified as I was the day that I went to treatment.
And how many kids did you have?
At that time, I had 2 kids.
2 kids.
I had a son and a daughter. And so anyways, I went to treatment. I did the thing. I didn't know how feral I was until people asked me mainstream questions about like, what's your favorite color? And, how do you feel today? They had that little chart that had all the pictures of the faces with the emotions on it.
Oh, the smiley faces.
Right. I could identify with angry and I could identify with happy, and I couldn't identify with a single other one. And I remember feeling something that was distinctly wrong with me. Like a gal asked me my favorite color and I burst into tears because I had no idea. It was like that level of feral. And I just thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do any of this. People, I would hear talk about in treatment that they had that they were there because their wife had put them there, or they had lost a business, or they had, flushed an education down the toilet, or some series of things. And I never had anything to lose other than those kids. It was, everything that I owned fit in a backpack, and it had been that way for years. Mm-hmm. And so, I came out of treatment and I started doing the things, and I was on this mission to get the kids home. And part of my story is that one of my kids died. One of my son died in CPS, and I don't know. I can't tell you why I didn't get loaded. Everything in
That's really amazing, actually.
I don't know. I mean, I was 6 months sober. I was 3 months out of treatment. I didn't have a single solitary tool to my name as far as what it looked like. I told you how I share in meetings. It's like I'm there because I'm fascinated by what's going on, and I'd never heard people talk about like the fear and the grief and the pain and the shame that happens on the inside of your body on the outside of their body. Like I'd never operated in circles where people did that.
But that wasn't the environment you grew up in.
No, it could get you in real big trouble if you have that level of vulnerability in the circles that I traveled in. And so, I had a fascination, but I did not understand how I was going to be able to connect to it. And because I come from systems of like abuse and shame, I don't know how to ask a question either, like for fear of appearing stupid or foolish. And so like I just pretend. I do as the natives do, and that's kind of what I did. But anyways, I stayed sober, and I was sober for many years. I ended up, I'd gotten sober when I was 25. When I was 32, some painkillers got introduced into the scene from a dental appointment. And I don't think the painkillers was the problem. It was that I didn't tell anybody about the painkillers that was the problem. And shortly thereafter, I drank, and I just remember having I was like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. And I think maybe I got sober really young, and I have a lot of information about life and the world. And at that time, I owned my own home, and, had been kind of operating a side business, and I was on the PTA of my daughter's school. I had since given birth to another child, my son, Riley, and I thought, I think that I can drink successfully. And
that makes sense, because you'd put your life back together.
Right.
In a way that you'd never experienced before.
Ever in my life. Yeah. There was nothing about, like, I wasn't raised that way, any of that stuff. And I, some part of me had really not reconciled. Like, I was clear that I was a drug addict, but I wasn't clear that I was an alcoholic. And like, and I don't know why, because I was diagnosed with late stage alcoholism by the time I was 19. So it was like it didn't really make sense that I didn't understand it, but I started using drugs to manage my alcoholism, and then alcohol wasn't a problem anymore.
Yeah, me too.
And so
that makes total sense.
You know the drill. So yeah, I took the first drink, and the remaining drinks took me.
Yeah.
And it took me 15 years to get back into the rooms and to get sober and to come back into community. And I tried. I probably have 25 attempps. 30 attempts.
Did you come in and out, or were you just out?
In and out, in and out, in and out. I'd get a year, 18 months, 6 months, 3 months, a week. It was just that over and over and over again, to the point where I thought whatever the magic was that befell me the first time that I got clean is that I had used up my chance, and that it was inaccessible to me. Is that I wasn't going to be able to have the thing that other people have, and that I had wasted my shot. And, the disease of addiction takes me to places. I'm not a cowboy. If you look at me on paper, I look like shit. I look terrible. But none of it is like rooted in bravado. It's that like my conduct is a reflection of the like despair that's happening inside, and I create noises louder on the outside of my body than what's going on inside. And I use all of that stuff is to drive the machine that is addiction. And so anyways, at the end of my using this last time, I had caught a pretty significant case, and I had gone on the run. Not because I was interested in being on the run, is that I just don't know how to turn myself in. Because if I turn myself in, they take away the dope, and then I have to meet myself, and I can't bear to meet myself.
Oh.
I have taken my kids, who I said I would never do something like that again. I have taken them for the ride of having a loaded mom, disappointed my family. My friends are essentially non-existent. Everybody that I'm associated with, to some degree, we have, we're in relationship with each other, and there are intimacies because we are in this kind of vulnerable experience together, but it's really all about self-preservation, and it's always going to be me before you. And so there's no trust or safety or any of that kind of stuff. And I was pretty sure that the best years of my life were behind me. I had penitentiary charges in front of me. And again, I petitioned the universe. I was like, God, if you can keep me alive long enough to get me to the penitentiary, like, I'm done. And as often happens is that, the divine creative universe comes in the form of King County Corrections. And I found myself in the back of a police car, heading to go do my time. And I had never been so grateful in my life. And so, it was my second trip to the penitentiary. And one of the things that you see when you're in the joint is they're the funniest, most compassionate, creative, ingenious women. Industrious women of industry.
Is it anything like Orange is the New Black, like at all?
I mean, I guess there's moments.
Okay. I had to ask.
There's moments. And so, but it was that there is nothing that is inside an institution, from my vantage point, that really prepares you to come home. If you don't, if you've got too much time, you're not eligible for programming. And if you don't have enough time, then you can't make a waiting list to get into programming. So like if you're in that middle of the road place, then you're watching television and you're doing your state job. Like that's it. And so like one of the things that it says on the wall, and I've talked about this a lot, is it says reentry starts here, and it's just not true. Reentry should start there, but it doesn't. And so, I feel like I counted myself really fortunate is that I was a woman who had been sober before. I understood the steps. I was not enthusiastic, and I need to repeat this. I was not enthusiastic about going back to 12-step recovery.
Well, most people aren't, if they're being honest.
Is I wanted, and I had tried a variety of other things. I wanted anything else to be the solution, but it does work. But it does work. Mm-hmm. And my experience was, it was the only thing that had ever worked. And so I was willing, and this is kind of my little shout out or whatever, is that like people who bring meetings into corrections facilities are essentially, they're equivalent to saints to me.
Wow.
It is, there were women that brought meetings in every week, and it was Saturday morning, 7 a.m. Nobody's getting up at 7 a.m. if you don't have to get up at 7 a.m. But there were a handful of us who were deeply interested and invested in being sober. And these women came every single week. Right. And that like started the journey for me. I spent my time, doing my job, but I also spent my time like poring over anything that was like spiritual in nature, or that like talked about like the disease of addiction or the maladies, the sufferings that come with the trauma that attends the lifestyle of being loaded. And I want to tell you that in large part, while I am a woman that practices no religious faith, I have deep spiritual conviction, and I understood, like I was in high-speed chases and coming out of medically induced comas and a series of things. There was nothing about my conduct that reflected a desire to preserve my own life, and it had been preserved anyway. And I thought, if there is some magic that's connected to that, like I want to understand what that is, and I want to understand how to have some reverence for it, so that like the story of my life can have meaning, and is that it not be a waste. And so I did my time that way. And, and there's all the shenanigans that happen in the institution. And I was like, girl, gas pedal that stuff. If you want to do it. But like, I'm cool. And so I came out of an institution. I was really fortunate. I got to go right into a halfway house. The Department of Corrections paid my rent for a few months. So like I wasn't in the crisis of like hitting the bricks and going, oh my God, how am I going to figure this out? Yeah. Is that there was a little bit of a cushion for the landing so that I could just deal with the trauma of like riding in a car.
Yeah. Very simple things that everybody takes for granted, but when they're removed from your environment,
it's incredible.
It can be very shocking.
Really shocking. And it's just like, in the institution, if you put in a kite to have a medical request attended, you're looking at about a 2-week turnaround until you get an answer. And it doesn't work like that outside. Everything moves at the speed of light. And it was like the just regular functioning stuff is like I had to learn how to just be in the world.
Well, and with technology, the technology landscape changing so much, I'm sure that just in and of itself wasn't, because you talked about payphones, right?
That's right.
Like, those aren't even existing anymore.
Right.
Like I haven't seen one in a very long time. So like you've seen a lot of change.
Yeah. Yes. And so, and I wasn't down a terribly long time. I feel like it's important to tell this little part of my story is that when I had gotten arrested, I was looking at the max end of my sentence. I was looking at approximately 7 years and I was cool with it. Like I was cool. It was like I lived and I will do the time. It's my stuff. Maybe I need every minute of it. And it's lousy that the penitentiary acts as a resource or a stopgap where healthcare should actually play a role. Is that because there isn't anything else, penitentiary will interrupt the cycle of my drug addiction. But I went to court and the judge said to me, he said, Carolyn, I'm looking at your record and I see that you have some pretty significant periods of time without arrest. My guess would be that you were sober during those times. Is that true? And I said, yeah, sir, it is. He goes, I don't think that you're a woman out there catching the world on fire. I think that you're a woman with a drug problem. And he took one of my felonies and dropped it to a gross misdemeanor charge, and gave me the low end of my range and a dose of sentence. And he said, I am going to do this. I suggest you use it wisely. And like I went back to my cell and I was really kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing. And it wasn't until I got back to my cell that I realized I was doing 1.5 years in the penitentiary instead of 7. Wow. And I don't know why I heard that guy, but I did. I heard him. It was like, use it wisely. And I've since been able to go back, through a series of this serendipitous little traverse ran into this woman. Her name was Leslie Mills. I think that she was the corrections officer that helped with the implementation of the jump out vans and oversaw armed corrections officers from Canada to the South King County border or something. It was really weird. I ended up in this place with her doing the speaking event, not in a place in the penitentiary. We were going back into the penitentiary to be useful to the gals in there. And I was telling a little bit of my story and she's like, did you ever think about thanking that judge? And just the week before I was like, actually I had. I feel like I owe that guy an amend. He saved my life.
He did save your life.
Right. And
he didn't have to have that compassion.
He didn't, not at all. And so she's like, we're going to talk after this and I'm going to help you. And I couldn't remember who the judge was or any of the things. And so I gave her my information. And a couple months later, I got a phone call and she's like, I set it up. You have to show up down here at the courthouse at this time, blah, blah, blah. And at that time he was, he had gone from being on the bench in the capacity that he was, and he was a drug court judge. And so I went and I watched all these drug court cases go through, and I had been a person who had been in drug court, and I got an opportunity, and the gal who had brought me in, she's like, do you remember him? And I was like, I don't remember his face, but I remember his voice. And I was a wreck by the time I got to jail, a wreck. And, I was talking to him and I was like, hey, I just need you to know, you gave me the sentence a number of years ago. And what I have done since is that I now work for an organization that works with people who are impacted by the criminal legal system. And so the sentence that you gave me changed my life. And I felt like it was important for you to know it. Is that you told me to not waste the opportunity, and I didn't. And what he said to me was, he's like, I've been doing this work for a really long time. And, at nighttime we put on our pajamas like everybody else and we get in the bed. And some days I ask myself, do the sentences that I hand down make any difference in the world at all? No one ever comes back to tell me whether it did. So thank you very much for coming to do it. And so my life has been this series of those kinds of events over and over and over again. I used to think that like miracles were this extraordinary thing, and it turns out that the extraordinary lives in the ordinary. It's like miracles are a part of my everyday life. When I first came out, I was in a meeting and this lady had said, in the vein of miracles, she said, I don't just believe in miracles, I've come to rely upon them. And it just struck my heart like a gong. I just thought, like, is that a part of the everyday workings of people's life? Like, have I been 2 clicks to the left and just always missing it? I felt like I was a victim of circumstance, a burden to anything that I ever touched, that anything that it might have meaning or value to me, I instantly began to grieve it when it was in my care because I knew that it was going to leave and that somehow my own like deep innate value was the cause of my loss. I had no understanding with a relationship with like the world that operates in seasons and cycles, and things come in and they go out. And that like part of the process is to like really have reverence for the moment that you're in, and like that like spiritual awakenings are actually deeply painful sometimes. It's like anything that is deeply rooted must be extricated root and branch. And that when I began to operate, I think it was one of those things that many people's grandmothers say to them is that if you want self-esteem, do esteemable things. and is that I began to move in the world operating with some sense of principle. And that was it wasn't that I needed to learn new stuff, although that's been useful too, is that I had so much to unlearn. Like I had so much to unlearn. And it was like, sure, identifying as powerless over alcohol and drugs, sure, couldn't quite concede the unmanageability of my life or that an absence of sanity was connected to any of that stuff. And then being able to follow a direction or guidance, like to take your word for it. I have deep mistrust of everything on the planet. Like, and every system that I've operated operates by transaction. So if I give you something, that means you're going to ask something from me. And I don't know if I'm going to have it or if I'm going to be willing. And so it's better not to ask for the help or receive it than to find that a note's going to get called due that is far beyond my ability to pay. And so like being able to, gradually move into the space of like trusting other human beings, I think it's probably been the primary thing that I've done in this sobriety, was to ask for help, be willing to hear no, ask again, and then trust the help that came.
Yeah.
And so, through that process is like being able to do some really deep internal work. And much of it has been done in 12-step rooms, not in the room specifically, but with other people who operate in that space. And to be seen like completely. Is that like there's no stone unturned. It's like, these are the things. This is absolutely who I was as a parent in my active addiction. These were the impacts that had. These are the things that I'm deeply afraid of. And it's so funny because like I'm not afraid of being stabbed or caught on fire. I'm afraid of being seen as petty. You know what I mean?
And only people like you and me can laugh at that.
It's that these ideas around my worth. And the thing is that I'm playing chess all the time. So like I have a feeling and then all of a sudden fear kicks in and I start planning for the future. And I've made up an entire story about how this scenario is going to go down. And then I begin acting in my physical life as though that thing is true and manifest it for myself over and over and over again. And so like being able to do some really deep internal work has allowed me the ability to like really acknowledge like my not only like my own fragility, but my own preciousness. And so, and I've only been able to bear witness to that by watching it on others. And so, part of my journey was working for a little grocery store, and it was the first place that ever trusted me. And I ultimately was trusted with the keys to the safe and, the keys to the building and all of this stuff. And I've got one of just about everything on my criminal record that tells me that I'm never going to be trusted with anything ever. It's a bad idea. It's not a safe bet. And, but I was able to earn those things, and they were really, really treasures to me. It was that level of trust I felt was almost sometimes more than I deserved. And I wanted people to know that it meant something to me. And so I honored them as in the gift, in the way that they were given. And maybe they weren't given that way, but I sure heard them that way. And but in my free time, I was doing just kind of a side hustle, working with gals who were impacted by the criminal legal system. Often they had kids. Always they had drug issues or alcohol issues. And so like my work life supplemented me doing this other thing on the side as a servant in the community. And I was really clear internally is that like whatever, I remember saying at one point, I will do anything if I can have like a victory over this thing that is whooping me to death. And for whatever reason, I didn't forget the prayer. I just remembered as like, call it what you will, but for me, it was like, I owe, and I am happy to pay. And so, and then it turns out, as you were moving in relationship with other people in spaces of, tenderness and healing, is that like, as you are being useful, you are healing yourself.
Yeah.
And so, I always like something that pays me too, it's like,
and I heard for a long time, I've heard the phrase, you have to give it away to keep it.
Yeah.
But most recently, I was just talking to somebody about this today. Most recently, I heard it in a different way. And it was, you have to give it away to get it. And when I really, thank you, that is the truth.
That's right.
That is the truth, because what you think you get just doing some of the work, yeah, you get something, sure.
That's right.
But like, you don't really get anything.
No.
In comparison to when you give it away.
That's right. I had heard something really similar, along the lines of is that like, I'm always willing to do the thing, but I want information up front.
Yeah, sure.
And that it doesn't work that way is that understanding, and forgive the language, but it's the best I've got in this moment, is that understanding is unlocked through obedience, not the other way around, is that I have to do the thing first. And then the wisdom and the insight and, the mechanics reveal themselves. Like, and I wouldn't, it's the same kind of, analogous to like, I can be a person that delivers babies all my life. I can deliver every size, shape, color, design of a baby, but I have no idea what it means to have a baby until I've been pregnant and had one. Yeah. I just don't. Yeah. And so it's like all of it is a theory until you've lived it. And so it was that path. And I was had an opportunity. I was living in the halfway house, and I was managing that halfway house and working at the store and doing the side gig and taking care of my own recovery life. It was primary, and and the way that I nurtured my recovery, not just my sobriety, because I can not use drugs, but I can't stay not using drugs. And so, I really was invested. I understood that in the past, I had always sought to elevate my material life, and then my recovery was just kind of a byproduct or whatever. It was like, it's an addendum to the thing that I'm doing. And I opted, I thought, what if I switched that around? What if I elevated my spirit and emotional and well-being, mental well-being life, and my physical life has since risen to meet it.
What a weird coincidence.
What a weird coincidence. Weird. And so, I was doing that work, and a gal was like, oh, I'm going to go to this place, and it's called Weld. And because I think I'm going to move over there. Will you give me a ride? And I was like, yeah, totally. And so we went, and she interviewed with Jody, who still does housing now. And he and I sat and talked for, 40 or 45 minutes. And we got in the car to go back to the halfway house. And my friend goes, I don't think I'm going to go there. And I go, really weird, because I think I am. And so it was really just like that. And at that time, they had a couple of men's houses. There was Jody and Patrick were the two guys that worked on staff. They were it. They were the team. I mean, there was a couple of folks in the background, and then Amy King, who was the founder, doing the little machinations. But Jody and Patrick were doing the work. They were boots on the ground, and they had just opened a women's house, and they had no females on staff. And they were like, hey, so you're doing this thing, and you're coming out here as one of our on-site house managers. Cool, but we were actually thinking about crafting a position for our women's housing navigator. Would you be interested in doing that? I was like, I'm already doing it for fun and for free. So 100% I'd be willing to do that. That was its own strange transition, because I left a job that I loved to go do a job that I didn't know I could do. I wasn't sure yet. And it turned out that I loved it. It was the thing that I was doing. I loved it. But there's this transition that happens when you are moving from this place where you are operating from a place of service and empathy. And while that doesn't change, but the transition to professionalism is that there is like some survivor's grief and deep guilt and remorse and this sense of an absence of loyalty, because all of a sudden I am transitioning from the one that's being served to being someone who is of service. And there are agreements that must be made with oneself. One of the examples of that is I got connected to this gal, and she, God, I wonder where she's at. But I didn't know her. I'd met her one time, but she had a 70-month DOSA sentence. So if she didn't go back, if she, blew the whole thing up, she was going back to do another 70 months. And someone had called me and they were like, hey, I know you don't know her well, but Carolyn, you seem to have a fairly decent relationship with the probation office, which I did. I was on a DOSA sentence. I reported and did all the things that I was supposed to do. I never got the blues from anybody about anything. They would come and do house checks at the house, and they were jovial, and we would laugh on the porch, whatever. It was a weird thing to like have those kinds of relationships with the quote unquote cops, but it was like that. And when you're not doing anything, there's nothing to be tripped out about. Like, who knew? And so anyways, and she was like, this person she's going to go back for 70 months and she doesn't want to, but she's made this choice and she's loaded and she doesn't know how to turn herself in. And I was like, well, tell her to call me. Like, I'm super down to help her. And her CO had shown up over at the house and was like, if we can just get her to come in, we can do the violation and then she can be back in community. But like, if they have to come catch her, dude, she's going to lose her DOSA. And so, and this was the thing, like this was this opportunity, like the police have never been trustworthy agents in my life or experience, like to be able to take their word for it. And I was like, and I go, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to go have a conversation with this girl, but like, do what you said you're going to do. And so I went and talked to her, and we, it was a whole thing to go get her. She was like hiding in a bush, and it was a bunch of shenanigans. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, I thought you brought the cops with you. And I was like, I didn't, like I'm not the police, but also we're going to go see the cops. So like weird. But we went to the jail and we walked in together, and they asked me a series of questions and I answered them, and they asked her some things, and she turned to me and she had this look on her face, and she's like, thank you so much for helping me do this. And I understood it. God, I'll cry about it. I understand how hard. It's like, I don't want to be on the road that I'm on and I don't know how to get off. Yeah. And of my own power, I cannot. And then the police said to me, okay, Ms. Presnell, you're free to go. And I don't know that I had ever walked in and out of a jail like that in my 35 plus year history. And I remember getting in the car and having this deep sense of discomfort and disassociation. I'm like, what am I? Am I the cops now? Like, what's happening in my life? This transition. And I felt all of these sweeping feelings and emotions and stories. And then I just remembered, like, my primary objective here was to be useful. Mm-hmm. And to be useful, like, I am not going to combat this stuff from the outside in. I'm only going to be able to do it from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And so, like, if this is my objective, is that I'm not walking around on the planet as a mandatory reporter, but I am going to serve my people in the best way I know how, mm-hmm. in the places from which I know that I have my own struggles and strife. And so Weld Seattle, been doing that for now like 6 years.
Incredible.
It's been really good work. We started out, we have those 3 houses. We now operate approximately 20 houses in the King County area. Housing model's pretty alternative. I'll talk about that another time because it's, super extensive. Well, I mean, it takes up more time than I'm going to give it in this moment, but it's pretty non-traditional. Essential gist of it is that we contract with developers with houses that are slated for demolition and remodel. They're habitable, but while they wait for their permits, they allow us to house our population of people.
That's incredible.
Right. And so we currently have contracts with King County Mental Health Court, King County Veterans Court, and King County Drug Court. And then we have a couple of master lease houses. And then the model that I talked about operates all of our other housing. We just we're currently serving over 100 people live in our housing community. And then we have Weld Works, which is essentially a direct work staffing agency. We work exclusively with second chance employers. So people who have criminal legal system impacts, they get to bypass all of the barriers that you usually have to that attend being somebody who has a criminal history, gaps in their work history, an absence of, tools or ability skills, soft skills, hard skills to be able to be regularly employed. If you've got like corrections obligations or treatment requirements or family court stuff, like we work with employers that navigate around all of that stuff.
That's so incredible.
If DOC shows up, I don't know if people know this, but when you are at work and you are on probation in King County, particularly felony probation, DOC shows up at your place of employment in full tactical gear. How do I explain that to my grocery store manager? You know what I mean? It's that like all of a sudden there's this stigma that you must have done something significantly bad if the police show up like that for you. And when in fact, that's just what they do. And it was a drug case. And so anyways, so we absorb all of that kind of extra stuff so that people can just be about the business of figuring what it looks like to connect to work and consistency and routine and how not to blow up on my boss when I'm mad and how to ask for somebody for a day off because when you feel like you have gotten this opportunity, I don't know how to tell you that I need something and teaching people that their value is inherent and that as a part of the, landscape of being an employee in Washington State, you are entitled to PTO. You can, in fact, take a day off, those kinds of things. And so we have been doing that work. Digital literacy and the way that you talked about is that there's huge gaps in people's relationship with technology. You come out after doing a long time and you tell somebody to screenshot or Google something that you might as well be speaking Swahili.
Yeah, different language.
It's a different language, and the entire world operates off of technology and apps and banking and everything. And so we do, really some of the preliminary work of getting people comfortable with technology. We're currently getting ready to launch some female identifying programming, community-based, for the women of Weld, and which I'm super excited about. We're actually doing some program build out for that now. And then there tons of things, but I feel like this is a super like kudo, but like this year, Weld was recognized as Washington State's Organization of Year. And it was really remarkable. Like we heard it and I was like, oh, that's cool or whatever. And then we went to Olympia and we were, up there receiving this award with like the woman that developed DBT, like it was just crazy. It was like, I remember looking at my ED, I was looking at Pat and I was like, how did we get here? Like our head was down. We were doing the work. We were doing the work that needed to be done. And really what our investment is let's create the thing that we needed when we came home.
Yeah.
Let's create that. And so like when we're talking about this stuff is that like and you can give somebody a house and you can give somebody a job, but if you don't get them the internal resources to be able to receive the thing that you're given, then you have wasted a resource and in essence created a new trauma.
There it is.
And so like doing the work so that people can really receive the thing that's being offered. And of course, with a grateful heart comes this sense of wanting to make a contribution. And we have a system that like restitution looks like money. Is that like the only way that I pay that I have any restorative kind of action that's connected to anything that I might have done in my criminal history is that I pay it in the form of a legal financial obligation. I never get back to go back to a store owner and go, you know what, I'm really sorry for what I did. I broke into your house or I stole your checks and I wrote checks on your account and created like harm for you and your family. Like you never get to do that. And this sense of real restoration and like what activity and action and program has done for me and like being able to do this work is to be able to find a way to heal the wounds of who I had been on the planet and use that stuff as an asset to help other people heal theirs. And so that is the work of Weld Seattle. We're currently in a capital campaign, we've been doing really great. I think we've got about 12 of the 25 million that we're trying to raise. Much of it is capital dollars, so we're still out there shooting for programmatic and operating costs, but we got the capital money. So our building that's located on 14th and Jackson, which is right in the heart of the area, we love being there. Anybody who messes around on Jackson, you know what Jackson looks like, but we're kind of in the heart of the epicenter of where the King County Jail is and the federal halfway house and the work releases and all of that stuff, so that we can support our people as they are coming back into community. But we got the money, so we are building it's going to start in a month or so, the construction, a big, bright, shiny new community resource center for, partners in the community that are doing this magnificent work, and for peers in the community who are invested in giving back to their community. And, most importantly, those who are coming out of incarceration or with legal system histories who need an opportunity to have an ecosystem of care in which to address the,
ecosystem. That is exactly what all of that we've talked about today.
Yeah.
That's what's needed.
Yeah.
Right. And we're going to put all this information in the show notes so people can learn more about you and more about Weld Seattle. And I just have to say, this conversation today has been so incredible. There's so much juiciness in your story. And all I heard was, I heard authenticity and I heard hope.
Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah. Thank you.